out in the shed again until I get the magneto back. It's just little bits and pieces, little jobs I can do. And one that I actually mentioned in the last film and lost was I did fix the dipstick. I did look at machining a groove in it and using a small O-ring, but it turns out I don't have any small O-rings, and there isn't much material there to work with. So what I ended up doing is machining a small groove in it, and I cut a section from a small coil spring, which is what that silver piece is there. And the groove is sized so that that sort of piece of spring compresses down, and that seems to work really well. There's no danger if there being any rubber or anything there to go hard and fall off and drop into the sump. There's no way that can come off. But the fact that it's springy means it'll clip into place, and it just locks it into place. The other thing was the carburetors. Somebody did left a comment on one of my films saying normally you would put the float bowls at the front of the carburetors so that you don't end up with problems when you're going up hills, running out of fuel. And that's not something I'd even considered, even though I've actually experienced that myself in the past when I used to own an Austin 7 Chummy, which has a scuttle mounted fuel tank. And one day going up a steep hill, it conked out, and it's because the fuel tank's mounted high up and the fuel outlet pipe is on the front of the tank. So when you're going up a hill, if the fuel level is really low, the car's on an angle like this, the fuel pickup isn't picking up fuel anymore, so the engine stops. And I'm guessing the same thing can happen with these, with SU carbs like this, with the side that your float bowl is mounted on. So that's something I'm going to have to look at changing around. These all just unbolt, and everything's actually only loosely bolted together at the moment anyway. So I'll have to have a play around with how I can configure them. The difficulty comes from the throttle shafts, which are these, because these little arms are pinned to them. So in order to swap these over to the other side, I would need to remove the pin and turn these around so that I can push these through from the other direction. You can buy new ones of these and new shafts and things like that, so if I need to do that, I can do that. The other thing that was mentioned is the choke pull. Normally you would have this pulling backwards, but because of the levers I've got, I can only make it work forwards at the moment. And the reason, if I take this off, and we take it over to the test engine, I don't have any studs on there, so I'll just have to hold this up by hand. But if that goes on there like that, you can see there's no clearance around the steering box. So these levers, I can't just turn these around and have the levers pointing out this side. They'd hit the steering box. The way they do it on the real ones is there's a different lever that goes sort of like this. And again, you can buy those. They're not cheap. I think they were £20 each, something like that. But then again, it's £20 per lever and then £33 for the shipping to New Zealand. And I just find it painful. So maybe if I have enough parts that I have to buy, it's worth actually buying them and paying the hit for the shipping costs. It does go up. You'd think, you could add quite a few little bits and pieces and it's not going to make that much difference to the shipping, but no, it does. So I'd have to actually put it into the website and see. But I've got a funny feeling if I got 2 new levers and new throttle shafts, you're probably going to be paying £50 for shipping, which is 100 New Zealand dollars, which is a bit ridiculous, really. But we'll see. I'm going to take these apart now. Like I say, it's all only really loosely assembled anyway, which is why all the little pins aren't actually completely folded over yet, because I knew I was going to have to play with these. But I'll see if I can rearrange them. I have got a box full of SU carburetor parts, so I may have other bits and pieces I can use to try and make this work, but I'll see how I go. I have the carburetors off the manifold, and I started disassembling them to see if I could switch around the float bowls. And that all kind of went wrong pretty quickly. The problem with these, especially these smaller ones, is they use a very thin shaft for the throttle shaft, and these little arms are actually pinned to them, and it's very difficult to remove those pins without damaging the shaft. This one's still okay, but even with the pin on this one, I had to drill it out because it didn't actually go through the body of the little arm correctly. It actually went into the arm, so there was no way to drive it out from the other side. So even with the pin on this one drilled out, I still haven't been able to remove it. The other one, I was able to drive the pin out, but even holding this end securely, it needed enough force that just the shock going through it was enough to crack and bend it around one of these holes, because they're pretty small. So I will need new shafts. And then I realized that the levers are handed anyway, so I need them to operate that way around. Well, that's how I had them originally. When I swap the float bowls over, I need them to operate that way. These ones, you may actually just be able to re-drill the hole and reuse them, but you can get them the right way around anyway. So it looks like I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and place an order. I can also then get the correct choke levers. So the way they work is they come down this way. So you can swap around where the pivot is. So the pivot, I think, will go on this side and the spring on this side. So it'll pull backwards to pull the choke down. So I can order those. I'll have to order new shafts. The throttle discs are okay. And it looks like I'll need to order new arms, unless I modify some of the ones I've got. The ones I've got are taken off old carburetors, so they're pretty banged up. If I'm going to buy new ones and I have to pay for the shipping, I might as well just pay for new ones. The float bowls, again, are handed. The covers are handed. These are the best ones I've got, and they also have the little tickler pin on them. So these are the ones I want to use. Mounting the actual bowls is no problem because these ones are horizontal. So these come in different angles, different amounts of twist, effectively like that, and different heights, I believe. These ones are just straight, so I can swap the bowls around, no problem. They'll just go on there, and I can make up a new fuel pipe between them, especially now because I've got lots of that tube left over. So they'll go on there. I'll have to make up a new fuel connecting pipe, which will have to join there to there somehow. It doesn't have to be hardline either, of course. I could use flexible. And I think that's it. That's about all I can do. So I'm going to go inside and look through the parts book and figure out which parts I need to order, and I'll get that done. You can see with the manifold off, this is one that somebody's modified. So I didn't do this. This is how I got it. But it does fit these carbs. Ideally, these little flanges would have been thicker, and then I could have fitted studs in there, but they're pretty thin. So I'm just sort of bolting through. And you can see where the mounting bolts go. They actually go inside here. And I think I will actually use bolts for these rather than studs and nuts, just to minimize the chances of anything coming loose inside there and going down into one of the intakes. So if I've got bolts in there, one, they're very unlikely to back out, and even if they did, I don't think they would then find their way into the engine. Whereas if you've got a stud and the nut rattles loose, it could, in theory, fall into the engine through there. I don't believe I've got any of those, so I'll probably have to order some more nuts and bolts and things as well. I'll have to see what I've got. I haven't got any new ones, but I might have some good used ones I can clean up. Something like that, but that's not going to be long enough. Oh, it might be. Oh yeah, something like that would work if I can find another one of them. So that's that, really. Back out in the shed tonight. I've done a little bit on the Land Rover. I'd taken the bumper off and straightened it out where it's all been dinged in the corner. You can see the light's still a bit smashed. I may have to see if I can get new lights or something for it. And where I'm pretty sure this was powder coated, and where it had been powder coated and been dinged in here, the powder coat had cracked and it had rusted all through there. So I cleaned all the rust out. It was very pitted. I just put some filler there to bring it back to smooth and then painted it. You might notice the corner pieces are missing, and that's because I had trouble with one of them, the side that's been dinged, of course. I was pushing it into place, trying to manipulate it, and these bolt to steel brackets, and one side obviously been a little bit bent because I was having trouble getting this to sit level. So I was tweaking it, and then it basically broke. The little screw holding things broke off. Actually, several of them were already broken from where it had been dinged. But the problem now is I need to repair these so I can screw these back on. And this is what I really hate about modern cars. They're just not built to be fixable, not easily. So you can see this is one of the good ones, and even this is a bit dinged, bent up. So either I'm going to have to repair the plastic somehow, or I don't know if epoxy will hold to this stuff, or fiberglass. Fiberglass and some new mounting points, or glue them in. Or else do what I was going to do on the front, and you just drill them out, some of them, and you can put screws through from the other side, which looks crap, but it'll hold them on. Unfortunately, when they're in places like this, right on the edge, you can't do that because you can't get a screw head to sit flat on there. So I'll have to see how I can repair those, but luckily that's not something that's absolutely essential. I can still drive the car without those. We're taking it out tomorrow, hopefully. That's why I had to get it back together, just to hire a little, like a rotary hoe type thing. So the hire place has them on a small trailer. So this is one of the reasons I wanted the vehicle I could tow things with. But I had to check the little cable that goes to the trailer was working, so that all the indicators and the stoplights and things work. And of course I needed help with that. And unfortunately, after helping, she forgot to turn the key off, and because she didn't know the controls had left the headlights on, so the battery's gone flat. So hopefully this will just charge up again. Probably needed a bit of a charge because it's been sitting still for a while. It looks like it's taking a charge. Yeah, it's dropped back a bit. So hopefully by tomorrow morning it's going to be fully charged again and ready to take out tomorrow night to pick up this rotary hoe thing. Now the Riley, I have removed the temporary block and the gearbox, obviously. That's a real pain in the neck. There's just some things on this Riley that are just horrible to deal with. One of them is the gearbox mount, which is this sort of pin in here, which this screws into the bottom of the rear of the gearbox. And there's sort of rubber blocks in there. That's actually rubber mounted. But you have to unscrew this to release the back of the gearbox. This is effectively captive because of the torque tube here. I can lift that up a little bit more to get that out. But you have to kind of how you reassemble all of this again, I'm not really sure. You kind of have to lift the torque tube up, which is why it's sitting on blocks, engage the U-joint spline, keeping it above this, and then slowly lower it down onto this and thread this in to the back of the gearbox housing, I guess. So that's going to be fun. And finally got the gearbox off. Luckily managed to get it on the splines on the flywheel, so that's good. That was something that worried me if this was actually going to slide home, but it did that okay. You can see the release sort of cup thing. This is what pulls on the release bearing in here, and this is another one of these things that's a real pain in the neck on Riley's to assemble. This has to go through, that bottom shaft goes through it, and then these two arms engage with the little holes on the side of this thing. So the way this works is this top bar comes out and these two arms separate, so you can sort of slide them apart. You have to do all that in here, basically. So you have to slide them apart and get them onto there. This isn't fully mounted. I'm going to take this off again so I can actually get the shaft in place easily. But that's a real trick on these Rileys about how you separate the gearbox from the engine. You have to disable the clutch release, or disengage the clutch release by releasing this top pin and sliding these arms apart inside the bell housing, and then you can pull it off. Otherwise, all that happens is you get hung up on the release bearing. It'll go that far and then it won't go any further, because the release bearing works by pulling against a bearing on the end here, so it won't come off. The other reason I have to pull it all apart is somebody might notice the problem here. Those are the bolts holding it to my engine stand. Theoretically, I could undo these bolts, take all of these out, and this isn't going to go anywhere because this is hard up against there, but I'm not going to risk it how it is. I'm going to set up my gantry crane and make sure the engine is well supported, and it may now be time to take it off the engine stand anyway. The other thing I've been looking at, somebody pointed this out to me, and it's something I need to look into. This is the Brooklyn style sump that I've got on the engine, of course. I explained about how difficult it is to mount it with all these silly little studs that you can't even easily get to. The other thing about it is it sticks out the front of the engine 2 inches longer than a normal one. And this is a normal one here. This one, it looks really mangy, but that's just a little bit of corrosion in there. All of that will clean up. This one is actually in pretty nice condition. It's not got any broken fins or anything. So I'm going to clean this up. But you can see on this one how you can actually get into the sump, into the screw holes, I mean. So it's much easier to bolt this one together because you can get to both sides. So you don't need to use studs in the sump like the Brooklyn's one does. Obviously this has much less oil capacity, but I'm not racing it, so that's not going to be a problem. But the reason I've got this out, just in case, is as well as all the difficulty of getting the engine in with the torque tube in place, you also have to get it in around the steering box, although I'm going to take that off because it's easy enough to remove the steering box at the moment. You just drop the drag link at one end and that'll all come out. But then when that engine and sump are in place, the sump comes right up to the tie rod. I measured it off the car, obviously. I haven't tried it on the car yet, and I got that there'll be about 1/8 of an inch clearance, and luckily these springs are pretty flat, so there's not going to be much backwards movement on the steering mechanism of the tie rod when the suspension's moving, but it's going to be very, very close. And this isn't a mistake. This is actually how they are on real Brooklyns. There's one actually for sale at the moment, and there's an interesting PDF, like a a vehicle inspection report, and it actually shows a photo of this, and you can see there is no clearance between the tie rod and the front of the sump, which is interesting. Because the Brooklands was a 9 that was effectively shortened and lowered and changed for racing, everything on it is extremely tight, extremely close, tolerance wise, even on a normal Riley 9. So you can see, you know, the gap between the back plate and the end of the steering tie rod arms is very, very small, but that's how they are. That's completely factory correct. So I think my next job will be, I'm not sure the best way to do this. I think maybe rearrange things a bit so I can roll the chassis further back and move the engine and gearbox over to here, which is where I'm going to need them eventually anyway. I might be able to move the MG back just a little bit. And then I can attach the engine to my crane, which is easily able to carry that weight. And then I can move it around. So now the engine, all the bottom end, everything like that is assembled on it. I can do everything on it in the position it is in now, hopefully. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. The other thing is I did remove the inlet manifold. As somebody pointed out to me, the float bowls really want to be on the front so that you don't end up with fuel starvation if the car's going up a steep slope. Interestingly, the one that's currently for sale, an original one, I think it's for sale for 150,000 British pounds. That's got the wrong sort of carburetors on it, and it's actually got the float bowls on the back. It's got what look like later HS or H type carbs, rather than the earlier ones. One way you can usually tell is the later ones have a flange on the inlet side for mounting an air cleaner. I think most of the pre-war and the vintage type ones don't have that. They didn't really run air cleaners. So it's interesting. So I've ordered the right parts that I need to swap them over, the handedness of the carburetors. That does explain to me why SUs are handed. I've always actually wondered why do you have left-hand and right-hand versions? So I'm guessing that's part of it. I've ordered the correct choke levers, the correct brass levers for the choke, so that they will clear the steering box but also be able to be pulled from that direction. So much easier to arrange the choke cable. I also ordered new jet kits. I'm upgrading the jets to their more modern kind, which are meant to be ethanol fuel proof. So I always try to avoid ethanol fuel, but at some point that's going to get harder and harder. So I might as well future-proof it now while I'm ordering the parts. Nothing's cheap. One of those little arms, and obviously I need 2 of them, they're sort of £45 each. I got a couple of needles. Going by the book, I went for what the slightly richer needles are. I've got the standard needles and the rich needles for the OM carbs, which are the same size as what I've got on this. And that was for the Brooklyn spec ones. So that should be a good starting point. And yeah, I think it was £55 for postage, which I hope means they get here very quickly, because that's not cheap. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. I think a little bit of reorganizing in the shed here, and we should be good to get the engine and gearbox together. I'm assuming that's actually the best way to do things, that you assemble. Is it better to have the engine and gearbox as a single unit and put that in the car, or is it better to bolt the gearbox in the car and then try to fit the engine up onto it? I don't actually know, but one thing is for sure, for cars like this, like the Brooklands, where it's basically a race car with a tiny little body on it and no room for anything, the only way you can really do any work on it is remove the body. Especially on a car like this where it's going to have a full under tray, you wouldn't even be able to get to half the nuts and bolts on the thing. So this is the other reason I invested in the little girder crane thing there, is when the time comes, I'll build some sort of cradle, I guess, for the body to make it easy for me to lift the body on and off the car. Because, yeah, the thing's a pain in the neck. This is how this actuating arm, or pair of arms, works. It pivots on this bottom shaft, so there's a sleeve on here, and this is the shaft at the top that gets connected to the clutch pedal, which is the problem I need to solve. And as you actuate the clutch, that moves those arms, and you can see the little pegs here. That's what engages with these slots in the release bearing housing, and you can see the little grooved guides on it, which is what slides along these pins. There's two of those. So this, on a real Brooklands, the clutch pedal is actually pinned to the shaft, which goes all the way through, and then there's a linkage on this side. On the saloon cars, it's a little bit different. That's the setup I've got here, where you've got the lever on this side and the clutch pedal actuates it from here. There's not a lot of room in the footwell of the car, so I have seen them, and the one I'm actually copying off does have the clutch on this side with a linkage here, so that would work. I've mentioned countless times, I think, in the hope that somebody might have the casting I need, or the forging I need, which is the arm like this with the bolt on the inside, because on this gearbox and this housing, I don't think there's enough room there. That's what I mean about not knowing how much movement I actually need on the clutch. The bearing has to have no preload on it. You actually have to have a gap there so the bearing isn't running all the time. So I've kind of got that there. So you need at least that much movement. That's what, about 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch. Plus then however much you need to actually disengage the clutch. I'm guessing that's not a lot. So actual movement on here, I don't know. And then how that translates to movement on here, I think it's going to kind of need to be most of the movement on this. So my thinking of how I'm going to do this without needing to modify the gearbox or modify any of the shafts or anything is I actually have, this is a second one of these, and I think what I could do is machine off this part of it and weld a flat plate effectively on there. So that this needs to go that way. Luckily these two splines are the same. So the spline on the middle is the same as the spline on the end, so that will actually fit on that spline. But if this is removed and I weld a little tab onto here, that can give me the linkage that goes down to the clutch pedal. And there is enough room to put that on the inside here so it's out of the way. And I think I'll still have enough room in the footwell for everything. So where are the pedals? Let me see. I have checked before, there's definitely enough room for the clutch pedal and a linkage so that the brake pedal is in the right place. So the position of this is critical from the gearbox. It actually ends up being, about there somewhere. I need to make up the right spaces to go in here. This pivots on that shaft and actuates the brakes. So I know that the spacer in there needs to be, I think it was about half an inch, quarter of an inch, half an inch. So I've got room in here to play with, which is why I'm thinking I do have space here to have the linkage on this side. So I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to do. I do need to check with the certifying people that it's okay to weld these parts. Brake parts, you can't. The inspector I talked to was saying to me that any forged parts you can't modify. So for example, these are the proper saloon pedals, which obviously are way too big. The good thing about this is it gives me the distance I need for that bottom linkage, because this is the clutch pedal. So I can measure that, so I know how big I need to make the little tab on the... Oh, my gimbal doesn't like it. I know how big that tab needs to be, because mechanically the setup is the same as the saloon car. So the clutch pedal needs a little piece like this welded onto it. The thing is, you're not allowed to modify parts like this if they're forged or cast. Apparently you're not allowed to weld them, heat them, bend them, drill them. You're not allowed to do anything with them. But if they're mild steel, you can. So these ones are obviously fabricated from mild steel, so I should be able to modify these as needed. The brake pedal doesn't need any modification at all. That's how it was supplied from the specialist. The only thing I need to do is weld the pads on the end. So that should be fine, and I'm pretty sure the clutch should be fine as well. So one thing I'm wondering is, in the Brooklyns, if the clutch pedal is pinned to the shaft, so the shaft is shorter, it's only about this long, can you actually remove it with the gearbox in the car? I don't know if you would ever want to, but I don't think there's enough room that you could actually pull that shaft all the way through and out. So it's another one of those things where you're dealing with a small, tight race car. There's not a lot of room for things. So I think now that I've seen this assembled on the bench like this, so I can actually see it, and I can see the limits of the movement I require here. So that can't go any further back than that, and it can't go any further forwards than that. It seems to automatically stop. So given I know how far back it needs to go, I should be able to measure. If I can do a test assembly of this, I will know where these engage on this when it's at its rest position, if that makes sense, which is going to have to be somewhere in there, because obviously you don't want it hard forwards, because then it's going to rub on this face, because all of this is spinning. So obviously this is standing still and all of this is spinning. So I think that's going to have to be the way I go. And just quickly, explaining why I don't just turn this shaft around in the gearbox. The reason is it'll only fit in from this direction because it's stepped. So the diameter on this side is smaller, matches this, than this side. So you can't actually turn this around. Unless obviously you could bore this out. But even with the mill, I don't have any way I could easily bore this out. I suppose I could make something up or do something like that. And then I don't think... And then that would fit on there. I would still have the same problem, which is this is the wrong piece. There's no clearance there for the bolt housing. Plus, I would also need a splined end at the bottom and another one of these to make the linkage. So that's the main reason I'm not doing it that way, I think. I don't have any way of cutting splines. So I've got the mill, obviously, but I don't have like a rotary head or an indexing head or anything to be able to accurately rotate one of these and be able to cut them. I'm sure there are ways you could do it, but I think going with the saloon setup, which I know does work. I mean, when there's an original Brooklyn's running around with that setup, it might not be original as it was from the factory, but then it comes down to this question: what's original after 90 odd years? So I think that's the way I'm going to have to do this.